Mazree. Admonition.
The group had gathered in the semi-darkness of the command center. All that remained of the command squad and Demeter's Dragoons officer Carter. Also attendant were representatives from the commissariat and Sister Superior Eleanor of the Ebon Chalice. Together, they had come to discuss what to do in the face of such overwhelming adversity. Against an enemy they still knew so very little, other than the deadly nature of their xenotech and relentless, unrelenting forces. Platoon commanders and junior officers related action report after report, ultimately ending in withdrawals, be it orderly or otherwise. Field ordnance officers gave their reports on munitions expended, sustainability figures for prolonged operations in ongoing areas of conflict, and the logistical nightmare of supplying lines of battle that seemed to now be changing on an hourly basis. During the chaos of forces being constantly routed or repositioned resulted in human errors. The wrong caliber of munitions sent to the wrong position, or valuable artillery shells sent out to resupply a fire mission base that had since been cut off by the enemy, an enemy that could emerge from the very ground beneath them. Further reports of patrols that were sent out to re-establish contact with lost fire bases that themselves reported back contact with the enemy before all Vox transmissions ceased. Commissar Bront gave his own solemn report. He declared that he had personally assumed command of 3rd Platoon when their officer had disgraced himself and broke in the face of the advancing enemy. He claimed they could not be killed, in earshot of his men, moreover. He declared your holding action to be suicide. I did my duty. I relieved him of the burden of his command and led our forces in his stead. His fingers went poignantly to the polished, dark grip of his holstered bolt pistol. The enemy are as resilient as they are numerous, Lieutenant. But I assure you, he said, voice rasping clearly in the near silence as all hushed to listen. They can be destroyed, if the men can be but encouraged to do their duty. My sisters and I shall stand and fight, even if it be alone. Though we be the last island of the Emperor's light on this rock, we shall stand in his cause, declared Sister Eleanor, standing proudly in her dark power armor and stained white robes, which, like herself, bore the marks of a long campaign without rest. Of the scattered fragments of intelligence gathered, a picture began to form, and it was a grim one. They were fighting a foe that not only had superior firepower and the ability to appear seemingly at will, they also seemed to be all but unkillable. If these marching constructs could even be considered alive to begin with. NCOs and junior officers reported engaging the enemy multiple times, engaging with combined infantry, light armor, and artillery elements, inflicting effective, sustained fire upon them that would have ensured the utter annihilation of a mortal foe. But each time the dust of their barrages cleared, out of the smoke, the flame, and the ruin, they came. They came on in marching legions, streaking projectiles of green lancing death that struck down all that stood before them in horrific, incomprehensible atomization. It cut swaths through the ranks of men, melted armor plate, and was even able to target a supporting flight of Valkyries as they made their close attack runs. They were slow but deliberate, unceasing, and utterly without any regard for the enemy they struck at. Metallic, skull-like masks that betrayed no emotion, not even granting the fallen the dignity of their hatred. And so, another position was lost. As the survivors retreated under the cover of heavy backline artillery shelling, not all were correctly ranged. Half of these withdrawals resulted in the shelling of their own already broken and routed forces. But it was still a preferable end to that hideously leaping, lancing green death striking out from the dust. The lieutenant had heard enough, it seemed. He outlined his plan. The outer defences were to be abandoned. All forces were to collapse in on the 3 islands at the core of the capital and the new ecclesiarchal bastion, consolidate their remaining strength, and establish new overlapping fields of fire. Visibility would be good from such a high vantage, further supported by auger scans from the Imperial flotilla in orbit. They directed lance battery strikes in conjunction with high-ground Earthshaker batteries planetside. This would create a cordon of death so overwhelming as to strike down any that approached. All forces would have 2 hours to mobilize and get to the rally point. The shelling would then commence, and anything in those hot zones would be reduced to explosive rubble and ionized thermal plasma. But sir, rapid repositioning on this scale will take more than 2 hours, said an officer from the logistics corps. Most remaining units have limited motor pools. We cannot so quickly relocate the supplies and munitions from their forward operating bases. I concur, sir, said a representative of the fleet. A warrant officer, if Taylor was any judge of their peculiar chain of command. It simply can't be done in that timescale. Much will be left behind. Air wings have taken significant losses, and the enemy have air power of their own. We do not control the skies, sir, and many units have reported casualties that are unable to be moved without airlift support. Lieutenant Taylor flicked his steel-grey eyes to the pair of them from under his tan-coloured beret worn low on his brow. It was immaculate, despite that he had been fighting in a withdrawal less than an hour ago. He assessed the mood of the room. He wondered how Major Demeter would have dealt with this. He would have said something pious and inspiring, probably, but that had never been Taylor's way. A battle was won on pragmatism, and a war even more so. If wars were to be fought subject to people's opinions and feelings, he knew that the Imperium of Man would have fallen prey to the Xenos, the mutant, and the heretic long ago. Against a foe so numerous and threatening, it was well that the Schola Progenium had taught him to be ruthless and utterly without pity. Nothing mattered except victory in the Emperor's name. And in that glorious and critical goal, no price was too high. He would drown the Xenos in the bodies and blood of his own men and women before he would yield the field to them. He would not allow it. Even this withdrawal chafed at him. But even if the planet itself should burn and break like Cadia beneath his very feet, he would be there to command the last charge, and with his last breath spit in the enemy's face. Then I suggest all those capable of walking should start running. Those that can't will receive the Emperor's mercy. He took a deep breath and felt that just this once, perhaps he should elaborate on his intentions. The shelling will detonate any munitions left behind, ensuring total destruction. Any targets that survive initial bombardments from shell and high orbital weapons fire will be engulfed by the secondary explosions. And glory be to the first man to die. And the Emperor shall know their names, added Sister Eleanor, clutching her rosarius as she did so. Taylor raised his voice so that none could miss his next pronouncement. These are my orders. I trust you disseminate them swiftly. The chrono is ticking, gentlemen. There it was. So simple. So measured. Mazree felt the blood drain from him as he stood at a remove from the commander's table and the assembled staff. Pale, gaunt face mostly obscured beneath his hooded cloak. The sacrifice of so much and so many in the name of what? And you tell them to fear me? He heard the words, and it was a moment before he realized, as stern faces turned to his, that they must have come from his own mouth. Why is the freak speaking without being spoken to? Said one of the attendant, a monster of a man in green flak armor, with a chain blade sheathed at his side, sergeant stripes adorning one shoulder guard, the Cadian gate on the other. The sister made to draw her powered blade. Lieutenant Taylor looked down on the old man from the command lectern with nothing but contempt in his cold eyes. He had the look of a man who had just been interrupted by the loud, inane babbling of a drunk or dotard. A tense silence settled in the room like an unwelcomed guest, broken only by the whir of cogitators and its attendant engine seer, perhaps the only individual in the room to be unconcerned with the sudden shift in atmosphere. The lieutenant flicked a gesture of dismissive command, and Mazree felt strong hands upon him, forcibly steering him from the command center and out into the cold corridor. They marched him up to the threshold and flung him bodily out into that corridor. He tried to catch himself with his staff as he fell, but not for the first time. His old, weak arms failed him, and he sprawled, bruised and battered upon that cold stone floor. And the doors of the command center were barred against him. Looking about himself, his cowl fallen back from his old face, he saw guardsmen and menials going about their business, barely paying any heed to the needs of the old man, so violently thrust to the ground by armed men. He grasped for the staff that had escaped his grip, only for it to clatter and roll just out of arm's reach. With a great and undignified effort, he crawled the distance like an animal and seized the staff tight. Steadying his breath before the next great effort, he began the task of fighting his way back to his feet from his weak, unstable, bony knees. He felt the cuts on those knees, wet and trickling, and realized he was bleeding. But the pain was nothing next to the cold, burning rage he felt in his very human heart. Demeter would never have treated him so. He at least understood that there were some threats that required more than martial power to face down. That there were things about which the Imperium was mostly ignorant and needed to be confronted in more learned and esoteric ways. Major Demeter would have at least pretended to listen politely before tactfully dismissing his input. That man is dangerous, he thought. Not just to himself, but to everyone around him. He heaved on the staff and found his feet, nearly falling again as he was jostled by one of the hasty passers-by. He needed to get to his sanctum. He needed to think. He needed to heal. And he needed to pray. Let me help you, my love, came the voice again. Mazree stopped stock still, eyes squeezed squeezed shut, the knuckles on his fist white around his staff. Let me in. You do not know your peril, my love. The forces of the Undying King are legion. I can help you. Mazree opened his eyes, and a crackle of invisible, colorless lightning fizzled there, pulsing to the beat of his heart. His old human heart. He channeled that power, creating a light from it, and drove the voice down, back down, deep into the dark place within that it had echoed up from. I need nothing from you. I have all that I need. For the Emperor protects.